thing that you said every city has to have.
What was the question?
What of the factors of a expanding city or any city does not care about the city limits or the country limits or the political limits? You have it in every city, but you cannot control it. The first one is, of course, the water. You know, where it comes from. It doesn't care where it flows. It is not limited to political boundaries. You can do political boundaries around it, but you cannot really control it. The same is true for the air, for example, and as we will see, even for the ground, for the earth. So all of this has changed. This is one example that I also mentioned once before in Jakarta in Indonesia. This is the interior of a seemingly normal shopping mall, as we all know it, with decorations of rocks and so on. It's a very, very lively place in the middle of Jakarta, this emerging city, very rapidly emerging city. And then, just a few miles away from that, we have the people who actually do the work for the production of most of these goods, or many of these goods. They're living in a very, very flood-threatened area of Jakarta. There was just recently a fire, as you can see here, and within days, these men rebuilt that part of the city very, very quickly. They have fantastic tools, their hands, their knowledge, their experience. They have also little things like that, columns, rebar columns that you can purchase for like $10 a piece. With those, they start to reconstruct their buildings, and they do it very quickly by hand. This is very narrow streets. You cannot go there with a car. You can just walk, and you can go there with the very thin carts that they have. The problem is this. It's the water. It's the river. It's the Ciliwung River going through that city, this huge city of Jakarta. And as you can imagine, the Ciliwung River is not only used as a beautiful river to look at, but it's also used as a toilet here, for example, or a washing place, or a garbage dump, just because there's no other place to put these things. And it's coming down from the south, from the volcanoes, and here you can see the catchment area of this. Here you have to see of Java, and then here the area of Jakarta, and this is the catchment of this river. Up here are these big volcanoes that it originates from. And this Kampung Melayu, where the pictures were taken from, is here. The people who do research on this water, to see water as a territorial entity, they're very aware of this, and they also construct their own system. The water system, which is not limited in scale, as I said, to a city, to a house, or whatever, but it is huge normally. You can see the scale of this here again on the left side. Remember the size of Jakarta, it's about, this is 20 kilometers here. So here you have already more than 30 kilometers by more than 50 kilometers. This in itself, again, is bigger than the whole island of Singapore. And you have almost 30 million people living in there right now. The water, which is the lifeline for the city, used to be the lifeline for the city, is coming from the south, and it's coming from these mountains. Upstream, it's a beautiful area. This is how it used to look in the past, and it's flowing downstream, but there's nowhere a place to put garbage or whatever to take it away in an orderly fashion. So most of it, or much of it, is dumped into the river, and this is causing some of the buildup of the riverbed and then of all the flooding. So you see something that's happening at the outflow is already caused by something far away in the territory before. The people who do that, Christophe Giraud and his group, they look at scales that we discussed here as well. So scale is very important. A big scale is the catchment area. The territorial scale is the catchment area. And then it goes into the corridor where it's actually flowing down. And finally, it comes to the site to this Kampung Malai where the problems emerge. Here you can see another representation of that. They see the river itself arriving in Jakarta up here, and there you can see where the catchment area is and how the water discharge, that means the amount of water flowing through it, is very high in places. But what is even more important to consider for the future, for you to plan if you ever work there, is that the city of Jakarta today has about this size. This is in 2012. Again, these are these more than 50 kilometers, more than 30, 40 kilometers. If nothing happens and people just keep coming, and it's not steered or planned in any way, then in 20, 30 years, it will be looking like this. So it will be completely filled, everything. If we have strong interventions, that mean having a very clear planning guidelines and so on, it might look like this in 20 years. Why is this so important? It's important because if it keeps growing like this, it will create situations like this more and more. In the past, let's say in 1972, 1980, this whole area that you saw before, here from the origins of the river, here to Jakarta, was lightly settled. This was the Jakarta growing metropolitan area, but these were all fields and trees and so on that could absorb some of the rain and the moisture. But now, by today, land use, if you look at it, it's completely paved, completely settled. And that, of course, then causes that you have lots of water being channeled into this river and having no way to go to the side or to penetrate into the ground. And then you have, in the city of Jakarta, situations like this 3-4 times a year by now. And before that, it maybe was every 3 or 4 years once. So this is the territorial aspect of water. You live happily, whatever, here in the city, and suddenly you have these situations that reminds you all these things are connected to larger issues outside of your city. But they are connected, of course, through all these stocks and flows that we discussed, including the governance of the whole place. This is how they worked. The students in Jakarta, they flew with UAVs, with unmanned aerial vehicles, and to reconstruct or to construct for the first time a simple 3D model. You could see that in the exhibition downtown if you went there. Also, they used something called point clouds, and they did that with terrestrial laser scans. Who of you has used that for your architectural modeling work? Have you? No? No? That's incredible. It's rather simple. So you go around and take images, and then out of this you get so-called point clouds. These are three-dimensional points in space, and that creates images just like that. These are not models. These are not three-dimensional models. This is just really individual points. They don't hang together in terms of objects. You know, you cannot have, it looks like a table, but you cannot use it as a table. But you can get very good three-dimensional impressions of this. And out of this, then they did a design studio, taking into account that for the next years probably it will not be possible to control this river, that it completely doesn't overflow anymore. So they built and designed for solutions that part of this river will still be flooded, part of these settlements will still be flooded, but that the buildings they erect there can deal with the flooding, so that it just have different uses in the ground floor. The water comes, people move to the top, the water goes away, they move down again, and they don't have to evacuate this whole part of the city. So that is really at the forefront. This is happening now to millions and millions and hundreds of millions of people actually around the world. On the other hand, we have this very sophisticated or age-old use of water here. That one is, of course, Zurich, and this person is one of the directors of the Urban Redevelopment Authority in Singapore. So he is looking at this traditional way of water in Switzerland. We had the same problem before. We had flooding. Zurich was flooded when the lake and the rivers were not controlled. but this is done by now. Or you have this completely other use of water that you might have seen here. Who has been swimming in that pool already? Nobody? Anyway, so this is lifting the water to 300 meters height in a country which is completely scarce of water, and using it as recreational place in Singapore. So these are two very extreme uses of water. Let's go to another continent. Still in territorial organization is the group of Marc Angelil. Professor Marc Angelil. And his part is called the territorial organization. His module, as it's called, investigates the mechanisms at work in the production of territory and addresses the impact of forms of collective organization on the makeup of urban environments. He focuses mainly in Africa and South America. The factors they are investigating are aging, which is happening everywhere, especially in the developed world, earlier than in the rest of the world, but it will happen there as well. The logistics, how you get things from place to place. This is the stocks and flows of material. This is the stocks and flows of informality, foreign aid, poverty, drug trafficking, food, and climate. So these are their main investigation areas. And they look at different places in the world. Those, of course, here in South America, then in North America, and Africa, India, Singapore, and Japan. For focusing on Africa, on Ethiopia, you can see the continent of Africa, and you can see this very green part of it here, where the future cities will develop very heavily, where most of the population of Africa will be. And this population most likely will be higher than any other part of the world by the end of the century. And in there you have this country of Ethiopia, the capital Addis Ababa, and in the north you have Bahir Dar. And in this Bahir Dar is a very, very fruitful area. It's a kind of soft soil, and this soil expands when it rains very much by up to 60 centimeters, and it shrinks down again when it dries. So along this they have also flooding and all kinds of bad events, but from a territorial planning standpoint, they decided this is the right area to plan, to keep people in this area, and they made proposals to simulation how that could be done. And these were the first renderings actually done by one of your colleagues here from this course a few years ago about the construction they want to do there with the people. They bring together the people of these villages and discuss with them and do interactive planning with them that their village might develop into a city so that nobody has to leave and go hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. They have discussed it, they have agreed on it, just like it was done in Switzerland and other places before. And they actually started to build these parts. And you can see they can build it themselves, most of it. The foundations to take care of the shrinking and rising soil. And then the first test constructions, which they did. And finally, the almost completed constructions where the majority of the people will be able to live in a very good conditions compared to now. So this is one territorial observation and interaction they do. The other one is in Brazil, in this city, Paraupebas. And there it's a different story. If you look at how people try to solve the problem of, or the condition of many, many people, they come up with solutions like that. And that appears to be a solution for this particular area. It's not new. Buena Vista here is this area, or before already in the 60s, via Kennedy in Rio, tried to take the same approach. But what I want you to think about is this is now, or a few years ago. And what have we learned in this territorial organization over the last years? Is it necessary that we do this? Or cannot we learn from what already exists, which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 900, 1,000, 2,000 years ago? How is it possible to have a high density in places like this, very high density in places like this? And why do we have it in such simplistic ways today? So this is something I want you to think about, because it is not enough to solve a problem right away. I think we always have to solve it with that, what we have learned in the past, in mind. This also brings me back to one of the first lectures, if you remember, when I gave you the example from Siena, the good and the bad government in this picture. So this is the same view from the City Hall of Siena, looking into the territory, looking into the countryside. So the relation between the city, where you are sitting and standing and viewing, out into the territory, out into the countryside, was governed by this good and the bad government pictures. And here you have this wall between the city on the left, the countryside, the territory on the right, and how a good government can make a fruitful interaction between the two. And just if you go back to this, I think it should be possible that we come to at least something as good as the one before today. So with all the things that you learn, all the technologies we have, we should be able to do that. Marc Angelil and his group, they have done very, very important interactions. They have worked with people there that they can directly build and rebuild their structures to come to more complex, mixed-use structures. Brillenburg, Klumpner are doing that as well in the same area. They have published books on that, and they show how even with very, very simple means, it is possible to make more complex and beautiful structures, and to reconquer, so to say, areas of informal and improve areas of informal settlement, such in Rio and other places, and make them into more livable places for the future. So that is their work, and it is, again, driven by large territorial flows and stocks of people, of material, of governance, and so on. I want to bring one last example, which is, again, a focus on a particular area. But before I start this, maybe you have questions, remarks? Let's say, who has worked on this scale before? Maybe to start this way is easier. Can you show a sign of hand? Who has worked on this territorial scale? Nobody? Okay. So it's the same problem again, with the politicians. Don't ever talk to people about problems you want to solve that they don't have themselves. So you will not get anywhere. So if you didn't have this problem so far, why I'm explaining that to you? I think it is a real problem for the majority of the world, and that's why we're trying to show that it is a problem, that there are solutions to that. Okay, let's go to the last one. This is an old friend here that you know, the energy diagram of Switzerland, or the energy diagram of Singapore, Sankey diagrams. Now imagine what would happen on a territorial scale or on a city scale. This, you remember, is all the total supply of the energy. But it has to come from somewhere. It has to come more normally from another place, from another territory, and then it is transformed and used. But what would happen if this entire supply for Switzerland, let's say here, crude oil, natural gas, nuclear power, water, or this one in Singapore, crude oil, natural gas, if this entire supply could be replaced with something else, something less polluting, something less CO2 driven. That would have tremendous impact, of course, on the quality of life, weather, whatever you have. And there are people who actually want to do that. This is called Granatech. Has anyone heard about Granatech? No. Has anyone heard about Desertec? Yes, right? So the Europeans wanted to build this huge energy collection, photovoltaic and other energy transformation fields in Northern Africa and move it to Europe. Asia is trying to do the same thing. Here, at this point, this here would be Singapore. This, of course, is Indonesia. There's Jakarta, this huge city that we talked about before, Borneo, then the Philippines. Up here is China, Japan, Korea, Australia. And the plan is to build a gigantic network, a grid, a new grid, that is taking all the solar photovoltaics, for example, being produced in Australia from the sun, which would be enough for the whole thing, and all the wind that is being produced here in China, in northern China, into one gigantic network. And that, if you use it, would in fact eliminate the need for most of all these other energy sources that you saw before. So this is a truly large-scale territorial energy supply network that we have never seen before on this scale worldwide. Are you, Dr. Huang, are you familiar with that? Have you heard the Chinese plans for that? Because China is a big contributor, would be a big contributor to this network here.
Yeah, not really, but yes, we have some wind and solar energy resources in the north and west part.
Right, right. So that's exactly where these connecting grids would be coming from. But this would be really a gigantic energy grid, you know, energy made in the north, in the south, and then distributed through the entire network. And the idea is to do that in the next 20, 30 years, and maybe it will happen. That would be something very good. Now, if you focus a bit down on that particular area, again, one of you wrote in the evaluation you don't only want to hear always about Singapore. Sorry, that's one more thing on Singapore, but this is also on the whole hinterland of Singapore. Hinterland is the German name, but it's used internationally for the connection between a city and its territory. And I don't like the name myself at all, but it's just, it's called like that. Milisa Topalovic, assistant professor with her students, did this, I think, quite beautiful work, research work, and they looked where all these goods, the material flows for Singapore, are coming from, and all the people are coming from. So it's really taking the stocks and flows idea into reality. There we have this island of Singapore, and the airport, and the seaport. And then you can see the seaport is connected to these parts here. This is already Indonesia, and it is on the island of Batam and Bintam on the south. And there they built a huge new factories to produce all kinds of good for material flow into Singapore. Mind you, all these territories here, these islands, were almost completely unpopulated. Maybe 3,000, 5,000 fishermen, families living there 30, 40 years ago, like in Shenzhen. Today, these islands in the south already have more than 3 million people living on them. Not only do they deliver goods, productions, but also material, earth, to build up the areas around in these islands, to take away earth from here, to fill up the sea, to make flat areas where they can build more factories, housing, and so on. Those I've shown you also before. The same happened in Singapore. Here we have Singapore today with all these big expanded land areas here, all made, reclaimed as it's called, but artificially made into the sea. And here we have the old landscape from 1923, 24, and you can see some of the mountains are still there. They have disappeared here, but Changi Airport and all of this is not there. So this is a real stock and flow of material, of territorial stock and flow of material And it resulted in this beautiful, big, huge model where everything that's black is filled in and everything that's white is chopped off or digged out, and everything that is transparent is as it used to be before. You have already seen, I think, very briefly this one as well. If you look at Singapore as the city and then look at the hinterland of the city, you can say this is the entire world. That was one of the Singaporean ideas. The whole world is our hinterland. Today you can say that for almost any city in the world. The whole world is their hinterland. Wherever you come from, you get goods from really all over the world and people. But here it is quite strong in terms of human flow of people coming from other countries to Singapore to work. For example, here from India, from Chennai, from Dhaka, from Yangon in Myanmar, Chiang Mai in Thailand, Bangkok in Thailand, and Chongqing in China, Chengdu, Beijing, Jinan, and so on. You can see. They come to Singapore, and these are literally hundreds of thousands of people who come there, who work there for a while, and most of the time go back again. And here, this is also, I showed once, is the sand sourcing, the flow of sand, where it comes from to build up this tiny island. So Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, much sand. And what happens with it, you can see here, the old Singapore in 1958, the actual volume, and then in the same scale, the new Singapore now from 2012, only a few patches of the old are left, and the rest is all built up with this flow of material and flow of sand from all of these countries. So it would be totally impossible for a small island state to do this without having a territorial reach. Here, the students did the same that you saw before in Christian Schmid's class. They learned from each other, so they also started to make their own map, and they came to the conclusion that Singapore is not really an island, but Singapore is just one part in a much larger archipelago, which they call Sijori, which is Singapore, Johor, and Rohau, and you can see the parts of it. So these are the Indonesian islands that are coming up here. There you have Malaysia, and you can see there are already very big industrial areas around Singapore, and industry, commercial, production, office buildings, and the green is residential and still natural places. So it is really not a city anymore. It is a whole area, a whole metropolitan area over 3 different countries, just like Basel or other cities, but on a much, much smaller scale. And it has really beautiful, still some beautiful characteristics, and it would be, of course, good to keep those. So I want to come to the end and ask you these main questions, and then I would like to conclude with some thank yous. So, if there was another course in the spring on this topic, what would be your preference? Would you like to go deeper into one area? Would you like to go even broader with more examples? What do you think? Be brave. Make a suggestion.
Someone criticized the fact that we're talking a lot about Singapore, but I think it's good that we have an example with numbers and exercise and people that actually spend a lot of time studying the city.
Mm-hmm.
I think that examples are the best way to understand what you're talking about. So I think it's good that Singapore could have been another city, but we have a lot of data and information and models and projects going on over there. And I think that's really one of the strong aspects of this course.
Okay. And in terms of depth, I mean, this is a very, we have 10 lectures, it's very broad. So would you like to go down into one area deeper, maybe 1 or 2 areas deeper, and for that leave others away? Or would you like to have, rather than just focusing on the one city or 2 cities, a few cities, go more worldwide along this path that I showed now, these different cities around the world? What is your need? Or let's put it from your need. What do you think you will need for your future? Where do you want to work? Yes?
I think it would be more interesting for me to go deeper in maybe one topic than go just over a lot of topics.
Right.
Just to understand better how it works.
So what could that be, that topic?
For example, for exercise 2, it was the city. Just to, maybe just using the example of Singapore, maybe just analyze Singapore with all the topics, but more deeply.
The livability and these topics?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that in the end makes it or breaks it. You know, if a city is worth livable, if people come there or not. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you?
So go deeper in maybe one example. Maybe three exercises or more exercises would still be focused on one main topic, maybe a city, something like that. It's just to maybe understand a little bit better what information city is, because in my mind it's still a little bit abstract and not that clear. I mean, we saw some definitions, we saw issues that are concerning information cities, but maybe to see it in a just like physical, like
one aspect, yes, okay.
And also how actually these cities are developed and designed and so on. I'm sure there is some good examples, and maybe we can go through one semester. I mean, just a proposition that maybe it can be a good guideline for the semester to understand. I would say very abstract issue.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good remark. At the moment, you see the information as the human beings, and the information is the only thing that connects all of these cities. The rest is so different in all of these places. So we cannot really say how to make a city. We have then really to drill down into one area, one political system almost, and not focus on the smallest common denominator, which is people and information at the moment. If we go to a deeper, or to, let's say, livability or whatever, then that will focus very much more on one area, one geographic area, one political area. Well, it has to, because we cannot do some things we do here in Africa. It would be a total illusion. We cannot do beautiful things that exist in Africa here. It would be total illusion. So that will be a challenge. That's a good challenge for me. Thank you. Have other ideas? Number of exercises. Some of you wrote, will like to have more exercises, more small ones. Others wrote, too many exercises. So I don't know what to do now. Exercises more to the same topic, going deeper again, or to different topics as we had it now? Any feeling on that? Yeah.
Maybe it could be better when the exercises are more or less about the same topic. Maybe you can choose in the beginning with which topic you would like to work as a student. So then you can specifically put your focus. If you would like to work on a smaller scale, then you can focus on the buildings. If you would like to work on a bigger scale, then you can focus on the energy generation of the city somehow.
Okay.
Maybe you can kind of develop sort of a small approach to the
So you would have like 3 or 4 different topics, and then sets of exercises for each one of these topics that you can choose from. Yeah?
Because now I think the exercises were really interesting, but we jumped from point to point and went to level. Of course, it gives a good introduction somehow, but still, this is it remains a bit abstract.
there are two different lectures actually, because this is as well an introduction to this theme. And for example, me personally, I actually never think about cities and things like that on that way. But I think it would be like the next step, so focus on one example and it would be maybe related with the exercise.
That's very good input. Because right after this meeting, we have another big meeting on MOOCs, our massive open online courses, the next ones, to decide what we want to do in those. And that will be exactly the question. The first MOOC is very broad as the lecture. I don't know if any one of you followed it through, probably not, or did anyone do that? You tried? How far did you get? 2, 3?
Halfway through.
Halfway through, okay. So the next MOOC will go in this direction. Will be more specific, but we have to figure out, where it will be specific. So that's what we talk about now. Yeah.
Just general feedback. I think the topic of the course is challenging in its nature, in the way that it has to thinking about envisioning what the future city is going to look like and territorial scale. So these are really big questions. And over the course of the course, you introduce different modeling tools, scenarios, and projects. And of course, each one of those are fairly massive in their implementation. So even trying to select the mobility, the public transportation example in Singapore, you could do a whole course just on this one element. So it's a bit challenging. I think it is good to think about a lot of these questions, but you just need to accept the fact that you cannot go very deep into each one specifically. I think the course should just be advertised as an introduction to a number of high-level topics that you consider when thinking at this scale.
Yeah, that's also a good hint, yes. Very good. Okay, thank you for your input. I want to thank a few people. First of all, I want to make sure that even we're dealing with computers in information processing, information technology, always remember also you can do beautiful things, beautiful software, beautiful interfaces with computers. And the ones that have developed here, that were developed in Singapore and here, these people take a lot of care to make these programs. And after a while, these programs can become as beautiful as drawings or books or whatever. So I just want to transport this into the digital age. It's important that in the digital age, we can also do beautiful things to interact with. Then also to take great care of what was learned. This exhibition here about the work of the last 4 years on the Future Cities Laboratory was a good example downtown. And I really want to thank these people for making an exhibition of all the work that was done there. And then, of course, these people here, you might not know them, but I want to thank them anyway. This is Peter Edwards, who is my successor in Singapore in that position as director. Jörg Brunschweiler, who is my director at the ETH Global, who enables many of these things. Ralf Eichler, who's the president of ETH, who is just having his last month in office right now and who really enabled through his action and very forceful support all these things that happened in Singapore. That is Jeffrey Huang, who was an assistant and PhD student here in this chair many years ago. And he's now at EPFL and he just became the new Dean of Architecture at this new Singapore University of Technology and Design. And she's the head of the alumni in Singapore, of the ETH alumni in Singapore, and she is working in the ETH Global office, Romana Rutz, as well. And of course, the team in Singapore, they were listening to us. Matthias Berger is the one from Singapore. He's standing right there. You're not here because he was in Australia at this time. So him plus all of these people makes almost the entire Singapore team complete. And finally, I want to thank you because you were a great group, very resilient, And as I mentioned, you have a high success rate compared with the MOOC, which was not to expect it otherwise, but I think this year we have really a nice group of you who have already completed their exercises or can still complete it today or in this week before you go into the final design work. So with that, I want to thank you very much for the course. Invite you for this afternoon, if you can, starting at 2 o'clock here, the presentation of all the work from the other courses as well. Simulation, some of you will present your work. And with that, I want to thank you and also thank Dong-Yeon for doing all the technology and you for all the recording and post-production and putting it on the web. Thank you very much and see you later. Thank you.
Je sais pas.